So thank you for joining the operations panel discussion. So my name is Nadia Milligan. I'm a hospitality sector and ESG partner at Keystone Law. As we all know, hotel operations is a very dynamic and vast topic. So we decided to focus on two very important topics. The first being revenue optimization and trends from F&B and also from MICE. And I don't mean the squeaky white kind with pink tails, but I of course mean the meetings, incentives, conferences and exhibitions. And the second part of our discussion will focus on the impacts of rebranding on operations. So, my panel here, we have Michelle Walder, Vice President Operations at the luxury lifestyle brand The Standard. To her left is Peter Harbour, founder of Sleep Hotels and CEO of Core Hospitality, who focus on focus service hotels. To Peter's left is Pete Heath, who is the founder of Venue Performance, who collects data on MICE. And to Pete's left is Henry Wilms, Chief Investment Officer at Elara Hospitality, giving us an investor's perspective. So, Pete, if you mind kicking us off, please, on MICE. We've heard this morning and this afternoon quite a lot of people talking about MICE and its importance. Someone mentioned a 10,000 metre square room, if you use it once a year, what's the point in having it? So tell us about its importance and how important it is for hotel ops and revenue.
Okay, I think it's probably best to start with a definition of what MICE isn't, maybe, as well as what it is. So if you look at an STR set, they put groups in with MICE. If you look at Hot Stats, which does this does P&L, they put conference and banqueting. So I think it's important, before you start measuring, which is what we do, it's important to get that consistency. So from our point of view, we call it meetings and events in the UK. I think Europe call it MICE. It's everything that is there for an event, for a meeting or a conference or a banquet or anything for a face-to-face event, and then everything that gets pulled in, so bedroom revenue, food and beverage revenue, obviously the hire revenue, AV revenue, that kind of thing. So for groups, for example, groups get not lumbered, but get put in the same category as MICE. They call it groups, I think. And that's just a group coming that take a load of beds. They don't have any meetings or events. So that needs clarifying, that the head, if you like, so the head is the meeting or the face-to-face engagement that has a revenue attached to it, and then the tail is all the revenue that gets pulled through. So yeah, that's just a clarification of what MICE or meetings and events is.
Right.
And then it becomes quite complex. Because, does it include the F&B? Does it include the bed revenue? There's lots of day delegate rates or 24-hour rates. So then there's lots of moving parts. Like, for example, here we've got an auditorium. We've got 2 breakout rooms. We've got a sort of foyer area. So how do you measure that? And how do you gauge that? There's an occupancy conversation as well, which in my mind is not an issue. It's not a conversation, but that's what the hotel industry are used to talking about. So that's how they apply that to MICE, but that's not relevant because it's about how much cash you can stuff into a square metre, as opposed to how many people you can stuff into a square metre. People are irrelevant. It's the cash that matters.
Yeah. Making the most out of every square metre.
Yeah, and then it's revenue per square metre. So we heard about that this morning, revenue per square metre. That's the same for meetings and events. It's how much cash can you shove into these 4 walls and a roof. It's as simple as that.
And Henry, from an investor's perspective, how important is F&B and MICE revenue when you're looking at an asset?
I mean, like always, it depends very much on the type of assets and the type of locations you're looking at. I mean, for and foremost, a hotel, it's obviously about accommodating people to sleep, and we obviously all know that rooms margins are a good notch higher than and not any other, but most of the other, let's say, departmental profits that you can see in a hotel. So obviously, a good chunk of the focus and the effort goes in when you do a business plan to get that right. I think that's obviously your main pillar. But then again, depends on what asset type you have. Are you in the budget hotel sector? Then obviously we call it more of a room factory, and you're really focused just on rooms, and the rest is not nearly negligible, but it is. Meanwhile, if you move up the ladder and you have to provide for, a big experience, a bit of resort or conference hotels that have big meeting space, etc., then it becomes obviously a much bigger focus. But I think the big issue there is, and I think it becomes a bit the reason also of the topic today, is it's not been adequately measured in the past, and there's no consistency around in data. So it's always something that people that do underwrites try to not shy away for, but it's a difficult task, right? So it could nonetheless be a substantial part of cash flow, and hence also on your business model. But it's something which is much more complex, to underwrite, definitely.
Mm. And Michelle, moving on to the standard. You're well known for having very experiential F&B offerings, events, very well known luxury lifestyle brand. How have revenue streams from your F&B offering evolved? And what trends are you seeing that help shape your F&B strategy?
Yeah, I think to your point, obviously there are lots of different brands have different kind of levels of food and beverage. One thing that has made Standard stand out is we take food and beverage just as seriously as the hotel. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, and especially in our larger properties, food and beverage revenue represents about 50% of our total revenue. So it is on the larger side, or the larger end, compared to other brands. For us, and you kind of touched on that a little bit, Henry, food and beverage is something that you really need to invest in if you want to get it right. And that's super important to us. It's a little bit of our USP, but we very much intentionally choose the concepts, choose the experience, and we focus on the guest very much in that sense and what their experience is going to be. And we also play with various venues. So while we know that there's going to be some consistency amongst all hotels, you have to have 24-hour room service and certain things on the breakfast menu or the overnight menu, but we very much are interested in bringing something different to the guest. In terms of trends, when it relates to the MICE industry, it's not something that we have a lot of experience in either. I think I mentioned that early on too. That's not necessarily a focus area for us. However, over the last few years especially, it's become more and more of a demand that we're seeing with our hotels as well. And so where we're shifting a little bit is how can we use our existing spaces to attract that MICE segment, and also the people that are coming in asking for events or asking for various conferences, they want that ability to kind of flex, and that is very much that bleisure guest, where they come in not just for the conference, but they want to have that either luxury experience or the lifestyle experience aspect of it, and that's something that we can really bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one trend that we're seeing, that when we're looking at new properties, we very much kind of suggest in just a lot of flexible spaces and allowing us to have that ability to flip spaces and turn them into an event, whether it's a suite area or one of our restaurants that we can do buyouts in, and ensuring that on the back end you have the operational kind of logistics to make that happen. Mm-hmm. But that's super important to us. Yeah. The other element is, food and beverage is difficult to stay in the eyes of the press and interest and keep it in sort of everyone's just wish list of places to go. And so at Standard, that's something that we pride ourselves in. We have a whole team behind that. So it's an investment. We have, marketing managers just for food and beverage. We have programmers just for food and beverage. We have music teams that focus on the food and beverage areas. So it's definitely something that, while it's a big chunk of our revenue, it's also a big investment on our end when it comes to our teams and what we offer.
But the Standard locations are A+ locations. For example, your Standard in London, just a few meters down the road. How do you differentiate yourself from the plethora of other good restaurants, F&B outlets, and clubs and bars and whatnot?
Standalone. Mm. Really good question, and always a challenge. So again, I think the way that we do it is the machine behind the restaurants and the food and beverage venues. So it's that team, really comes down to the people. Right. Our team of people that are constantly looking at different opportunities, not only to engineer the menu differently and come up with maybe new concepts or seasonality changes. However, we work very closely with different partners as well. And so we don't take ourselves too seriously in the sense that we really like to play with bringing in different, either a pop-up or a partner for a certain amount of time. And we work with that very much so in the food and beverage space. So as one example, last summer we worked with a chef. She doesn't have a brick and mortar restaurant, but she has a huge following. She's written cookbooks. Her name is Ista Belfrage, incredibly talented chef. And we allowed her to have a menu inside one of our venues that was, parallel to our existing menu, but it was a huge success. And one reason why we love doing things like that is hotel restaurants, as we all know, they kind of ebb and flow. They're there for a reason. They're kind of an amenity to the hotel experience. But the public outside, people that live in that community, may forget about it after a while. And these experiences allow us to bring those people back in, not only the guests to have a new experience, but for the community to say, oh yeah, I forgot about that restaurant at the Standard. That's a really cool thing, let me go try it. They bring their friends in, they talk about it, and it also gives the press something to talk about, the PR team something to talk about. So it's something that we really, really work on very specifically, and we have people that do it. Today I had a meeting about one of our upcoming partnerships for this spring. So it's really, really important to us, and that's how we try to differentiate ourselves and stay relevant in the industry.
So it sounds like something fresh, something new, in the beautiful surroundings which you have.
Yeah, and it can be something really playful. 2 summers ago, they worked with Morley's Chicken Shop from Brixton, which is very much kind of a fast food restaurant, but it was incredibly popular. There were lines down Euston Road, so it's just a really fun way to bring something interesting to the experience for the guest, for the teams. The kitchens love it as well because they get to try different recipes, work with different chefs. So it's a really
you
cool
engage
way.
the community. So when we talk about ESG, of course,
Yeah.
the S and ESG, you're bringing the community and you're becoming a social hub,
Yeah,
which is great.
exactly. Yeah,
Great, thank you.
Right.
And Peter,
Gasoline grill the same
we
way.
did. Yeah, from Copenhagen.
Yeah.
That was very successful
is that
last
the burgers?
August.
My local joint.
Yeah, I highly recommend. Delicious burgers.
Peter, your core hospitality is focused around focus service hotels, but you have several hotels which are very profitable in terms of MICE revenue. Can you tell us about the strategies which you've implemented that have been successful in driving that revenue?
But I only just had mice defined by Peter by just now, so that's really good. So we don't do
Or
mice.
your definition of MICE?
We focus a lot on what we can take out from every customer coming in through each and every hotel, not focusing on what segment they're coming from actually. But if you look at the properties that we're operating, we have several hotels that are very close to venues, and we take in a lot of revenue from MICE business, which is coming because they're having a conference or an exhibition elsewhere. And we usually actually get the parts of the business from that even earlier than the venues or the conference or exhibitions are starting and staying until later, because of it can be the people who are setting up the exhibitions and people who are preparing for whatever happens at conferences. So we are actually taking in quite a lot of MICE business, but not defining it as MICE business.
We were taking business from the MICE segment, as opposed to taking MICE business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the function in your property is to take the bed and the F&B
Exactly. But
of the event that's going on down the road.
exactly.
Yeah.
At the same time, we're trying to get as much money into our hotels as possible, because we can only, whatever happens in any town or city, we can only penetrate the market price-wise so much, but we can take as many beers as we can sell, and we can sell hamburgers, and we can sell whatnot, whatever it is.
Yeah, but that's what STR
Rent
this morning.
bikes out.
We're talking about, the Eras tour with Taylor Swift. They put that into groups, and groups, they sort of put groups and MICE together.
Yeah.
But that's, the Eras tour, they talk about events. So that's the same thing as you're talking about, events that are taking place where the hotel industry can drag revenue from in terms of beds and F&B, as opposed to this, which is an event taking place in this property. And that's a very different style, whether it be lifestyle or economy or luxury.
So we're leveraging on events taking place in our cities. So I guess it's really important to use that and exploit it. People need beds to sleep on after an event, and then you have a perfect hotel down the road which has got rooms.
Very true.
I think on that point, I think it's also then important that the operator has the employees that are able to offer and cater the services that they don't know. The guy at reception is not only the receptionist, but he's proactively looking to make additional sales, and he's empowered to do so from a personal perspective, but then also what we discussed from a system perspective, right? That the IT that sits behind on the operations actually allows him to do that in a quickly and efficient manner, which is not always a given, right? So I think I think that's important in order to, you have the hotel, you have the infrastructure, you have the people, but take advantage, as you say, as much as possible once the customer is through the door in your hotel, that you can basically get the maximum revenue of every customer that comes in, right? So I think that's something that we should not underestimate. Yeah.
But also, events like this are traditionally held, that horrible acronym, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Yeah.
It's like the train travellers. So that's 43% of your occupancy. So you've got to, if this is only going to be busy 3 out of 7 days, then not only have you got to, what do you do with this? It's just an empty space. So from an investment point of view, is this just dead space? Or do you max the revenue, deploy your staff elsewhere when they're not servicing the event that's taking place here? Are they doubled up as bar staff or waitress staff or what have you? So it's quite complex, and you've got to have a very definite sort of focus on that MICE segment in terms of events that you're bringing in, as opposed to events that you're feeding off. And then it becomes quite complex. But the numbers for generating, Andrew has paid a small fortune to be here, for example. So the revenue per square metre in this space should be very, very high compared to a bed revenue, for example.
And it is most probably not, I would argue.
Well, that's down to Andrew's negotiation. I don't know.
So,
I would counter that, though, as well, in some ways, is that if that was my hotel, I would then challenge and say, all right, on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturday and Sunday, what can we do with
Absolutely.
the space? What else can we do? What else can we bring?
Yeah.
And turn it into maybe not necessarily a conference, but use it for something else.
Yeah, space utilization. So this
Yeah.
could be, going back to the community that we were talking about this morning, this could be, bring the local theatre group in here, for example, and have them running auditions or practices or, getting creative, going out and finding what's going on in your local.
yeah, but I would argue there as an investor, I see very few operator being so proactive and maybe going the extra mile to do so. I think quite a few are very comfortable in their zone where they are, but going there and about and create these extra opportunities. I think that's where you can still make a huge difference out there. And we also, as investors, try then to push and challenge operators to do so. But and same for F&B space, etc. I think people are aware that those are big opportunities, but really people that actually can deliver on this, there are just very few. And even the investors that argue that they know about F&B and etc.
Operators pay rent per room.
It's a very difficult world, right? It's a very changing environment. So I think it's difficult to underwrite, number one, when you do your business plan, but on top of that, the execution is I think, as we discussed, execution generally is highly underrated, but I would say it's then on the day-to-day, as you said, it's square meterage we pay when we buy a building. How do you get the maximum out of every space that is in your building? Yeah.
If we take one of your hotels, for example, you mentioned the Nobu in Ibiza. How would you underwrite the F&B and any MICE revenue in terms of when you're looking at the asset initially?
Well, I wouldn't lie, but that if I compare my initial underwrite of what's going on today, no comparison, right? So I'm blown away but I think that's come back to what I just said. I think we had sort of what we call the base business plan, which is the one that needs to hold true to make sure the investment stands true. And as of then, we call it every initiative we take when we choose the brand or say, well, maybe we want to spend more CapEx here on the restaurant or more, needs to add on top of what we call the base business plan. So if Standard then comes say, well, we've got this fantastic F&B idea and here and there, here's the support, look what we did at Houston Road, look what we did in Copenhagen, then I might be convinced maybe to spend more capex, more investment, and see return on that investment. But yeah, in that particular case, F&B is also, I mean, in the ratios that you just told, and sometimes you ask yourself, well, are people coming to the hotel because of the restaurant or vice versa, right? So it's really, in those sort of properties, F&B is so so important that you need to get it right, and it drives definitely, although it's a lower margin business, but cash-wise on a euro per euro basis, it adds a lot to the NOI of the hotel.
Yeah. And if we bring the conversation back to MICE, so Pete, your company collects data on MICE, so I'm hoping you've got a great bird's eye view of what's happening in the MICE segment. Do you see any changes in MICE revenue depending on whether a hotel is luxury, conference, focus service? What trends are you seeing? Is revenue generally going up, or?
Yeah, everything's going up in I don't know whether to call it MICE or meetings and events, because I think there's some sort of clarification that's possibly needed. But let's call it, for the purpose of today, let's call it MICE. So again, just for clarification, I talk about this type of event for MICE as opposed to Taylor Swift Eras Tour, which you can pull the MICE money from. So everything's up in meetings and events. So I just said MICE. So last year we were up 6% in terms of volume across the UK. This is Germany and other countries in Europe are slightly different. But I mean, let's just look at the UK for the moment. But also revenue per delegate, which is one. So we measure a number of things. We measure revenue per square meter. So how much is your MICE function space going to give you? And to your point, Henry, I think if the investors and the financial clever people don't see a line, then they can't measure it. So until the operators and until the management companies and the brands put a line in the, dare I say it, USALI, and that's not me telling USALI what to do, but until there's a line in there, they can't measure it, so therefore it's very difficult to manage. But some of the numbers are revenue per square meter, and that's pretty good across the group. But in terms of growth, it's about 6% up on last year, so 24 on 23. And if you look at revenue per delegate, that was up 21% in 24 on 23, and it's tracking about 15% already. But that's probably because those bigger events have been forward booked, and there's probably a little bit cheaper or minimum spend. So MICE is growing, and I think, the fact that I'm, nobody knows who the hell I am. So,
I know you.
Well, yeah, well, we all know, but nobody here at the investor conference has been aware of MICE measurable data before. So now that it's there, maybe it'll start being discussed a lot more. But it's starting to get on the page a bit because of the growth. Beds are flatlining. We heard from STR this morning, 1% to 2% growth maximum, in the UK. Well, MICE is, 6% plus next year.
Yeah. Well, what's one thing, in your opinion, which is hampering growth in MICE? Why aren't operators jumping on the bandwagon?
I think a lot of them are. A lot of them have different models, like Henry was saying. If you know a model, if you know your bed, your F&B, like Peter was saying, it's not his business, it's not his sweet spot. Therefore, he's not going to go and chase it when he knows that he can't facilitate it or provide for it. So I think you have to know your market. But again, the market data has never been available before. So if you're looking at making an investment, the first thing you do is you get your STR deck out and you look at the sort of RevPAR and your occupancy rates, and you make that investment decision. But if you're going to invest in a big MICE hotel at Heathrow, for example, there's no MICE data. So that's what needs to happen, and that's a blocker. You've got some issues with technology and all that kind of thing, but I mean that's just, we've heard this morning that technology is a pain in the backside across the whole of the estate portfolio. So it's a real pain point. So I don't think that's a blocker. I think possibly just understanding it and putting it on the measurement chart is possibly what's going to do it.
So if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So you need to be able to measure it to know how to effectively make the best out of it.
Yeah.
And moving back to Henry, from an investor's lens, do you think investors pay enough attention to revenue from F&B and from MICE, or are they more focused on the room rates?
Well, it's shortly mentioned at the beginning. Ultimately, a hotel is a hotel, and I think a good chunk, if not the majority of the business, comes through rooms, and then the flow through is, as we all know, quite high. So I think that's where the obvious first focus goes, and then from there on it becomes increasingly more complicated. Yeah. So I think F&B is a fast-paced environment. We all know what's hip today might not be tomorrow. So that also brings along always capex investments, etc. So investors start becoming increasingly nervous about that story, and then on top, if you tell you, well, in the best case scenario, you might do 25-30% margin, they become even more nervous, putting more capex behind it. So it just becomes increasingly more complex, and that's when you need to have the right partners by your side to make that business plan actually happen. And I think it's the same for. I see until we had that first chat and got to know each other, I mean, I would definitely not know how to best underwrite a space like this. I would not, because I have no reference points, and two, I don't know anyone who's actually doing it really good. So it becomes just very difficult. So we take assumptions that kind of cover our base case, as I said, but I definitely see opportunity in hotels that have these empty spaces. I'm generally also quite proactive on the asset management side, so trying to push empty spaces in basements and things like this, which are well located to generate revenue and bottom line.
Yeah, makes sense. So a question to each of you. What would be your top tip to any operators who are looking to diversify or to grow the F&B or MICE revenue? Michelle, if you want to kick us off?
I'm going to jump in, just ask if we've got Q&A, because we're getting tight for time. We do. Russell.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Timer.
Fascinated about the revenue possibilities. I think Henry's got the key to this. It isn't just revenue that's important. And measuring it as best you can is great, but how much is the flow through to contribute to overheads? Now, I think you just said 25 to 30% at best. I have yet to see any decent hotel producing that sort of return.
On the F&B,
what do you, from F&B. What do you guys think is an acceptable number that you feel an owner would find acceptable? Percentage DOP.
So we in hotels we do, when we're doing very well, we do just shy of 60%, which is very, very high. But let's say for a norm in our sector, we do 50%. GOP. NOP.
Just on the F&B, he's asking. F&B.
To contribute to overhead.
20%.
20%.
Yeah.
So if your rent is 15%, you're making 5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't usually pay rent that way, do we?
With commercial
Speaking.
F&B operations.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But 15% is too much.
We're between 20 to 25-ish%. Yeah, typically. Pretty good. But the one challenge we have also is because we have multiple venues normally, multiple food and beverage venues, and we share a lot of the same resources, right? So you might have managers that work in one area, they also support a different area, same kitchen that some of the food is being produced from, so it's really hard to isolate each venue specifically to see what the profitability is. So that's something with owners can be a little bit of a challenge to translate that too, because you really have to look at it as one big picture, not just, each business plan by business plan for each venue.
I think on top it's not only the margin, but as I said, is also the capex investment that stands behind. Because obviously if you have successful F&B operations, let's take that as granted. Obviously the usage of the materials, etc. I mean it's not only money comes out, but also money that goes in, and then that obviously make us as an investor generally quite nervous. So there is not a lot of, I would say, in the hotel space, there's not a lot of success stories, let's call it that way, or operators that really, that stand out. I think there are not tons, right? So, yeah.
Beverage obviously too has the higher margin. So the more beverage focused bar spaces you can have and really push that and have a strong operator, the better.
Hilary, here we are.
Thank you. Michelle, question to you. Hi. We talked earlier this morning about the lifestyle sector and scaling and keeping that authenticity. So you as now heading up a lot of the expansion of the Standard brand into mainland Europe, and F&B contributing about sort of 50%, we said. How do you keep that culture of the fun that Standard brings alive going to these new locations and making sure that you can still deliver that 50%?
Great question. Kind of mentioned it earlier, but we do, again, Standard has a very different model from other brands, right? So one thing, for example, with owners or investors that sometimes we have to introduce and really explain is our marketing department sits completely separate from the sales department and from the revenue department. So for example, our directors of sales, they're all incredible, but they won't also wear that marketing hat. They work closely together as partners, but we dedicate a lot of work just to not just marketing, but within that sits the programming team. Like I said, we have a food and beverage marketer specifically just for food and beverage. And we work with a lot of different agencies too that can bring new partnerships in and new interesting concepts and even different industries that we might bring into spaces that you wouldn't necessarily think about. I can't mention it, but we signed someone for our Ibiza property this summer that is not your classic relationship that you would think in the food and beverage space, but we're hoping that will also just bring something interesting and bring different crowds of people that wouldn't otherwise be in your space. So I think for Standard, that's something that we really, really lean heavily on, is investing in the ability to bring new and fresh ideas into our spaces that other companies may not rely on as much, but we really look to outside to bring just different and fresh and new ideas, not always following the trend, as I said, but it's just bringing something different and interesting. And it may not always work. I think you have to have the humbleness to know that sometimes it's not going to work, and that's okay, as long as you try and give the press and give people something to talk about.
I guess just to mention here, but these things always personally make me a bit, there's a certain risk that if I think more, let's say, entrepreneurial groups and smaller companies, that have, that demonstrate these, great ideas and execute on them, if they get bought by bigger corporates, that spirit might be lost, right? And I think if I see the thing and I've signed up with Standard, it would make me nervous. I'm just being very open here that I see that, more suits are coming, and it will cut a bit of this, craziness and creativity, right? So, and especially if I've signed up for a long-term 15 or 20-year HMA, I'd be nervous.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a question.
Hi, my name is Jules from the Odyssey Hotel Group. I have one question with regards to the Standard. You just were mentioning we have a separate revenue manager, a separate sales manager, and separate marketing manager. That dilutes, of course, from the 25% because that all goes into the A&G of the property. And are they able to do more than just operate for the or do the work for the F&B operations or the MICE operations?
100%, yeah. No, they do the whole property. I guess my point is that we do have a different labor model specifically in order to activate a lot of our spaces that I personally haven't seen in other brands or other hotel models before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's why we want to have multiple properties in a country, and
Yes.
can we divide it over multiple properties?
Yeah.
And next comment, Peter, congratulations on the big deal you did with Marriott in Copenhagen.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Your 4 points flags.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to ask the last question, if I may. And I set this panel up. The idea was that Henry was going to be the referee for what's going on. And you've got Peter there with, and we'll talk about your 4 points flex. Peter's offer there is straightforward, select serve. Select serve? Agree with that? Select serve. You've got a much more complex operation in the Standard.
Yeah.
Now, one of the puzzles I've had as a writing about this sector is what Peter produces is a much more straightforward cash flow, much more straightforward investment risk. And yet typically the yields on budget hotels, economy hotels, I'm a bit British there, economy hotels have been higher than it is for luxury hotels. And it's always perplexed me that. And if you were to take it to credit committee, I want you to be honest here, if you had deals evenly matched between Peter and Michelle, which one's going to win?
Oh, Michelle.
It's unfortunately not, right? But I mean, in theory, a discount rate should reflect the underlying risk of the cash flow, right? That's the basic principle. So on the basis I have a more of a predictable cash flow with less risk, and I can buy it at a higher cap rate. I mean, the answer is pretty obvious, I would say. I think the interesting component in the hospitality sector is also let's call it the emotional component somehow. So I think, talking about the standard in Ibiza, for example, so there are people that are not only looking at the pure financial return, but have something else in mind and want potentially to own a special property, and that has somehow a notional value which is difficult to quantify. And hence, there is interest in making fantastic properties, but on a pure financial metrics, any day a budget hotel, yeah, of course.